All right, I'm going to use our time wisely, everyone. I know more folks will be joining, but I'll get us started. So, hi, everyone. My name's Natalie Sampson. I'm with the Michigan M-LEEaD Center at University of Michigan. I'm the Community Engagement Co-Lead. And this webinar today is part of a series we have called Residents and Researchers. And we do this with support from NIEHS, the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences. And we're guided by our Stakeholder Advocacy Board, which is a lot of grassroots organizations, state agency, local agency folks who really drive how we try to have conversations between policymakers and community and researchers to make sure that we are tackling emerging and longstanding environmental health and justice issues in our communities in Metro Detroit. So we'll make sure to share the link so you can go back if you want to watch any of the past webinars that have been on all sorts of topics related to water affordability, climate and housing, air quality standards, many more topics than that. But today we are going to focus on resiliency hubs, this concept of resiliency hubs that has emerged quite a bit in the last few years, but is not a new issue, in fact. And so we are lucky today to have three guests with us. We're going to have Theresa Landrum kick us off, a longtime community organizer and activist. Theresa is currently on a couple of boards at the state level working on issues like PFAS. Environmental justice is at the heart of her work, and she represents her neighborhood of 48217 Southwest Detroit. We also have Larissa Larsen, who's a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Michigan, and Kathy Velikov, who's a professor and associate dean for research and creative practice. We're going to try to use this time effectively and let you all get some questions in at the end for about 5 or 10 minutes, but please feel free to use the Q&A in the chat, and I'll be tracking on that, and we'll try to share any links and references that we make throughout, so you have that both during and after the session. So I'm just going to set the stage. Larissa has got us organized here. So just so you know where we're headed, Theresa's really going to take the beginning of the time to let us know why this is an issue, why this needs to be addressed, and sort of some of the experiences she's had and her community has had. And then Kathy and Larissa are really going to talk about sort of how agencies, institutions, communities, academics are responding in this moment with this idea of resiliency labs and share some resources. And then we'll open it up to you all. So Larissa, if you want to turn to the next slide, I just want to set the stage to really share these stats, which I think are pretty stark. A lot of folks know this, but when you layer it on top of one another and you start to look at how communities are impacted by a lot of different types of emergencies and disasters. So we're talking about this in the context of a changing climate. So Wayne County is number 2 flood loss area in the nation. So impacted by regular flooding, not just those 100-year floods, but we're seeing this more often. We also know that we're in an area in Wayne County that is impacted by power shutoffs. So DTE is number 3 in the nation. So folks are dealing with flooding, folks are dealing with their grid going out. We also just are going to hear from Theresa about some of the other related disasters of being in the Motor City and what comes with that. And then you can start to look at what does this mean when folks are also dealing with other challenges in their community. So we can look at household income as one indicator that suggests that people are being overburdened with multiple different exposures happening in these events, but also the ability to recover when the supports aren't there. And so this really sort of tells the story of why this work needs to be done in data. But I'm going to hand it off to Theresa, who's sitting next to me. We're at the Kemeny Center in Southwest Detroit, and she's going to talk about from her own personal perspective of why these resiliency hubs are so needed. So have at it.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for this opportunity to participate in this very, very important panel and to talk about what is needed, not just for my community, but for people across the nation. As Natalie said, I am from Southwest Detroit 48217. We are a community that's surrounded by more than 42 major and minor polluting sources. My community is one of the communities that's considered an overburdened community, according to the statistics and the data for the Michigan Environmental Screening Tool, as well as the EPA's EJ Screening Tool. I just want to share a little bit about the challenges that we face as a community, being a community of color, an age community, and what we consider now as a frontline community. We're on the front line of climate change. I just want to give you a little bit of history. So I'm going to go in chronological order. I have many stories that I could tell, but I chose just a few. Many of you may and may not remember 2003, North America went black, right? And this impacted not only the United States, but it impacted Canada as well. Well, a lot of people don't know that 48217, when this hit, we were one of the first to go without power, and we were without power for a very long time. And when we lost power, we lost the ability to use electricity to power heart monitors, oxygen tanks, whatever medical need in our community. And when our community and the homes lost power, unbeknownst to us, the energy was shut off to the more than 42 major heavy polluting industries. That meant there was no pollution controls. So poison was spilling into our air by the tons and tons of, for a very long time. So we're going to move to the next slide because I'll do lessons learned after we finish the other information. Not only that, by us living in an area surrounded by more than 42 major and mining polluting sources, we have Marathon. At the time, we had DTE, we had U.S. Steel, we had Camus Line, and Cleveland Cliffs. So that's in Zug Island, ES Coke Battery, and many others. So in 2013, what we experienced was an explosion from Marathon, one of many. But this one here, it imploded and exploded. It rocked the community for miles. So we are impacted not only by climate with power outages, we're impacted by environmental incidents that could cost us our lives. Could you move to the next slide, please? Okay, many of you have not heard about PFAS. And the word is so long, I cannot pronounce it, so we call it PFAS. But what we know is it's a dangerous chemical that is used by firefighters and the United States government to fight fires and cope things. Here, we're not only impacted by power outages and air pollution, we're also impacted by what we call vapor intrusion and pollution source intrusion, because in the state of Michigan and across America, industries are allowed to dispel their wastewater into our sewer system. The challenge we have is that industry and residents all share the same sewer system. Here in 2019, it was found out and noted by newspapers and news agencies, but we had been experiencing this before, way back to 2017. PFAS began to bubble up from our sewers coming from surrounding industry like GLE Scrap, Norfolk, Virginia Railroad, and Marathon. We were able to trace that back to them. They told us people walked in this for days. They drove their cars through it. And what we did not know, how bad it was, the concentration. We were told, oh, don't worry, it's okay. You're not going to be harmed. 3 weeks later, they said the stuff was so dangerous, they had to shut the road down for a quarter of a mile and allow Melvindale's fire department come and wash the road down and disinfect the road. Next slide, please. Here, we talked about earlier flooding. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. And we've been having flooding yearly. But in 2021, we had across Michigan what they call a 100-year flood. Well, it didn't mean anything to us because our community always flood, but it impacted more affluent areas like Grosse Pointe, Jefferson Chalmers, Warren, and other areas. But this is the street that I live on. Matter of fact, that flood is right in front of my house. And if you see the furniture there, right? Well, we just had a flood 2 weeks before. So it is constant with us. Well, then we flooded very badly in 2021, 22, 23, and 24. It was so bad that they actually used the center, Kimony Center, that we're in today, as a FEMA a command post for people to come from all over outside of Detroit to see if they qualified for FEMA. And so what we're looking at air pollution, we're looking at vapor intrusion, we're looking at soil pollution, we're looking at flooding, and we're looking at power outages that impact us continuously, not just during extreme weather situations, but we as a community suffer it all the time. Could you go to the next slide, please? In 2024 of March, we had a warm winter. And so when we had the warm winter, the snow melted. Well, guess what? It flooded every roadway in my community. The Southfield Expressway, the Lodge Freeway, the I-75 freeway. It flooded all major thoroughfares. Jefferson, Schaefer, Otter Drive, 4th Street. And those are the borderlines of my community. And again, guess what else happened? A train derailed. So our major thoroughfares were blocked. We couldn't get out due to flooding. Emergency relief couldn't come in. First responders couldn't get to us. So we were trapped in our own community. And when the flooding happened, guess what else happened to our community? We went without power. There was no electricity. So these are some of the challenges that we face as a community constantly. And I wanted to share that a little bit with you so that we can talk about lessons learned. We learned, first of all, that no one was coming to our rescue, and we had to fend for ourselves. So what we did, we began to triage our community. We had meetings, and we began to go door to door, and we began to call people and ask them, did you need food? Did you need medicine? Did you need a way that we could possibly try to get someone in your home who may have been homebound to the hospital? We called 911, they couldn't help us. We called the police department, they couldn't help us. We called the fire department, they couldn't help us due to the flood. Then we learned another big thing going back to 2003. When the blackout happened and we had no power, for almost 12 days, we found out that a lawsuit was started by nearby Melvindale, which is predominantly white, and Dearborn, which is predominantly white and a Yemeni population. Marathon is located in Southwest Detroit 48217. No one came to our door to say, get out. You could possibly be in danger due to the poisons in the air. So what we did, we found out that there was no real area-specific evacuation plan. And then we were told by the city, Homeland Security of the county, Homeland Security of the city, that there is an evacuation plan. Well, this is what we told them. If there's an evacuation plan and we don't know about it, then a plan is not a plan. And when they tell us, oh, it's on the website, but we also found out that there's a great digital divide. 75% of our residents did not have internet in 2003. They did not have a computer. They were not computer literate. So people did not have the instruction or the direction of what to do during an emergency such as this. And we then learned, looking at the demographics, that our population was really aged. Our average median back in 2003 age was 75. So that meant we had a lot of people in our community that had a lot of health challenges. We had a lot of people in our community that were caregivers. They had bedridden relatives in their home, and we didn't know how we could help them get out because we had no ambulance service. So we sat down and we thought, how could we get the resources to survive a catastrophic event like this? So we had to become community scientists. We had to learn what our city provided and what they did not provide. We had focus groups throughout our community to see what our residents needed. And we can go to the next slide. And as you can see, we began to address our own needs because we found out that the decision makers, when they make decisions, did not include us. and we learned that we needed to be in the room to tell them what our needs were. We didn't need people talking at us. We needed people talking with us. And when our community got together, we found out what they needed. They needed shelter. We just had a story yesterday where 2 young children were found in a van, passed away from freezing to death. Well, guess what? That's what we were having, because most of the power outages we have is in the wintertime. So we could have residents in their homes freezing to death. So they stated to Homeland Security, to the city, to the state, and to the county what we needed. We needed shelter. We needed power. We needed generators. We needed water, food, medicine, money. People were living in their cars. And then many people had to be displaced and placed in hotels. So that was a financial challenge that they have. And then some of the family members, after they regained power and during the power outage, had to be transported to the hospital and stay 4 or 5 days due to them experiencing the impacts from a flood, a power outage, or when it was cold. So what lessons learned? We have to be involved. We have to help ourselves. We also have to work with agency, state, local, and hospitals to see how we can get the emergency needs that we need during these outages. We also learned that there was no collaboration between the borderline communities. We are a borderline community. We border River Rouge, Ecorse, Lincoln Park, and Melvindale, and on the back end, we border Dearborn. We found out that if we had an emergency and Detroit could not get a first responder to us, we could not go to Lincoln Park. We could not go to Allen Park or call them to come help us get out. So what we did, we devised our own plan. We devised our own evacuation plan because we know the back streets that we need to use to get out of our community when we're in such an extreme situation. We also asked if we could partner with the surrounding border suburban community to get fire police. River Rouge, Ecorse, Allen Park, Lincoln Park, and Melvindale have combined their courts and their emergency teams, but not with the city of Detroit. And we learned also that Lower Wayne County, where we live at, we have the most frequent power outages and the longest duration of power outages in Lower Wayne County. So that means we have to be our own advocates and we have to demand the things that we need in order to survive extreme circumstances. I wanted to say thank you for allowing me to share just a little bit of our story of living and existing and coexisting with industries. So we have environmental impacts, we have Mother Nature, natural impacts, and we have the impacts of monies not coming to our community and access to funds and the help that we need. So thank you so very much.
Hey. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. Thank you, Theresa, for so poignantly and precisely framing the need for your community and for communities in similar situations across the nation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Resilience Hub planning process. As I, Larissa, Natalie, and other researchers at the University of Michigan have recently been supporting communities in Southeast Michigan to work on planning community resilience hubs and collaborating through the grant proposal processes. As Theresa mentioned, all of these require funds and funding and planning. And so first on the screen are a few resources that have become critical thanks to the work of organizations such as USDN, which is the Urban Directors Sustainability Network. There are substantial and excellent resources online to frame and walk groups through the community engaged planning process, steps for planning a building and facility, which I'll talk about shortly, funding for operations and management and grant support and other frameworks for Resilience Hub. And I've learned a lot from these resources. The other resource is from the city of San Leandro in California. That's the one on your right, which also has gone through planning and realizing a network of resilience hubs, and they have very accessible planning documents. And Robin, if someone could drop these links into the chat as well, that would be great. And so maybe next slide. So this slide I know is a little hard to see, but to summarize, the development of a resilience hubs has multiple steps. And those really include starting with the needs of the community, understanding the needs of the community. A lot of the work that Theresa just described and the work that they've gone through to understand their needs and what they need for their resiliency hub. And then the other steps include establishing a team that's going to work through this right through the whole process, evaluating site and building options, which is what I'll focus on a little bit more in the next slide, planning the operations, developing the site and building plans, and then activating and using the long-term operations. And I know these are hard to read, but give you a sense of the overview of the steps involved in planning and developing and then realizing and operating a resilience hub. We'll go to the next slide. And so of particular importance, once you know that you need a resilience hub and you've gone through understanding what functions and operations and support systems your community resilience hubs needs and your community members need, there is the process of choosing and finding a site, because a resilience hub is a physical place. It's a building and a surrounding landscape. It's a building that community members need to be able to get to in the cases of an emergency, and also it is a building that community members need to. That needs to be used year-round and also function in emergency mode. And so one of the first things it's important to evaluate multiple options that you have in your community. Look at your community assets. What is there? What assets does the community have in terms of buildings? And you have a couple of there's different ways to go with this. And I have two kind of case studies, and there's many more on the support sites in the 2 slides ago. One is to adapt a existing well-used and well-trusted community building. This could be a building that may be municipally owned, such as a community center, or owned and operated by an NGO or a faith-based organization. And it's a building that the community already trusts, that is already well used, and that would need to be upgraded with the resiliency operations, functions, and programming to meet the needs of a resilience hub. There's also an option to create a new facility, a new building, whether by rehabilitating and an currently unused building, or building a brand new building from the ground up. And a recent example of that is the A.B. Ford Community Center in the Jefferson-Chalmers area in Detroit, where the new community center was constructed that serves as a year-round community center, as well as a resilience hub meeting the resilience needs. And there are definitely, of course, pros and cons to both options, and it really depends on the community, their assets, and also funding scenarios that are possible. As I want to stress, one of the most important aspects is that the building should be within walking distance of the community. It's critical, where, as Theresa mentioned, roads may be flooded, transit may be down, their gas stations may be down, so people need to be able to walk there. It also should be a site that is currently or that anticipates will be well used year round and operated by an organization that is trusted by the community. And it's really important that there is that trust between the organization that owns and operates the Resilience Hub and the community. And finally, a really important consideration is that the building should be of a size to handle both daily, year-round operations, but then to handle emergency surge in operations as well as population. So next slide. And here's a few, this is taken from one of the support documents of USDN. When you get to the stage of developing the design and also the engineering of your Resiliency Hub, whether it's a new building, a rehab, or an upgrade, here's a few things that you might, that the community needs to consider. And they're all different types of resiliency. So resilient services and programming. So programming that builds community trust throughout the year, as well as preparedness and well-being, such as educational programming, CERT training, but also community gardens and food distribution, which are other activities that the Resiliency Hub might program for. Second is resilient building and landscape design. This means that the building itself needs to be able to withstand the disaster. Like flooding, it needs to be protected from floods, wildfires, earthquakes, and poor air quality, especially for a Resilience Hub that would be in the 48217 community. It also, many of these buildings can really be demonstrators of and be a demonstration showcasing green and healthy building and landscape construction practices. The Resilience Hub should have resilient communications. This means not only have communication systems that operate off grid, but also connect to the right government and emergency networks and agencies. And they also need to interconnect the community itself so you can get information out to the community. And these communications should be something you maintain year round so that people know to go there in times of emergency. Resilient power systems, obviously, as we've heard, critical to have off-grid power so that all of the operations of the building during an emergency can be functional. People can go there to meet any power needs for medical devices, health, and also other kinds of devices. Planning documents say a minimum of 72 hours of off-grid power. I think Theresa would say more than that based on the experience in Southwest Detroit. And so this usually means solar panels, backup batteries, and those are critical. And then finally, resilient operations, which ensure that there are personnel there in place who are trained, who can operate year-round, who know what to do, how to operate during an emergency, during disruption, and during recovery, that they have clear roles and responsibilities, emergency CERT training, as well as be able to kind of distribute and hand out emergency supplies. So those are some of the considerations in planning a Resilience Hub. It requires both upfront planning, design, and funding for planning, design, and constructions, and as well as financial stability in the long run. And we'll talk about that in the next section.
Great. Hi, all. I see some friends on the call, and so it's always nice. I think we're always learning from each other. I wanted to just talk a little bit about what Wayne County is doing. And again, I am not with Wayne County. I am with the University of Michigan, but I have some students, and we are working collaboratively right now with Wayne County and their effort to build a Resilience Hub network. And I will give a plug now and also at the end to Kara Dietz, who is the project manager. And this is a new project. We have, let's see. There's going to be several years of cohorts, so you have to be a community-based organization, and they walk through a process of evaluating your needs, what constitutes risk for you, what kinds of sensitivity, exposure, adaptive capacity. Again, better understanding sort of these, what are your needs, and then looking at what already are some of the strengths you have. So very much an asset-based approach versus looking at what doesn't exist. So in this, I just wanted to give you a little glimpse into what this process is about, because I think for many of us, whether we're in communities or working with communities, kind of want to better understand, what do we do to realize some of this? So Wayne County has put together this template, and I'll just highlight a few parts of it so you get a glimpse into what kinds of information you need to collect and present, and how it helps you kind of think through in a logical way what some of your next steps would be. So an overview of the whole template is that it has a community overview, where you are, who you are, so some demographics. It has a community resource directory that you put together. This has 10 categories, and I'll show you those just in a minute. Based on your community resource directory, you're then asked, and I'm speaking, the community-based organization who's leading the process is asked to make an evaluation of capacity. So finding, again, strengths and weaknesses, maybe looking for other organizations to partner with around these organizations, or thinking how to expand their own services. The fourth part is really the part of exposure. And Wayne County is taking, I think, a really good approach, which is looking backward and speaking to residents about what's happened. As Theresa told us in a compelling way, residents have a long history and they have a lot of knowledge. And looking at common things that have been experienced in the past and better understanding what the local impacts were. Again, we may, as outsiders, understand how much precipitation fell or how cold or hot it got, but what were those impacts? What provided help to residents, and then what additional things were needed? And again, this kind of then goes into step 5, which is assessing resilience. And then there are subsequent stages of looking at strategies to build around resilience. Wayne County is interested in thinking about these centers from 3 perspectives: everyday activities, disruption, and recovery. And so they have steps for that. Again, that kind of build on the things both Theresa and Kathy were saying about how this has to be a community active facility, even when the disruption isn't underway, and even afterwards when services, FEMA funding, things like that have to be allocated. These can be places that are resource centers. Okay, I said I would tell you the 10 categories. Most of these are pretty intuitive to all of you, and many of you work either in these types of organizations or with them. So this is, again, who is your network? And I think some organizations probably are overlapping in the provisions of services they provide, but I think this template is helpful because it's just a logical sort of accounting of what you know, and sort of putting it down in a way that then allows you to better assess, okay, what do we have and what do we need to build on? This is the capacity rubric, and I think Cara and Erin Kelly at Wayne County would tell you that this is very much and it needs to be an interpretation by the local community of what is the level of capacity they have. It's not meant to be, I think, a judgment, but again, a way to think about what do we do first? I think necessities, and then moving sort of along that scale. And again, this places communities so that they can think about what are their important next steps. Another part of this I mentioned is talking to people. So, what have been these historic events? And this is where my students, I think, I'm fortunate in that we're working with 8 of the communities. The students are able to get out and talk to residents and really catalog their stories so that, again, we have this repository of knowledge that can be then applied. Then I think it's really distilling from some of those experiences what systems, resources, and practices really proved resilient. Many of the practices of resilience aren't visible. They're people helping people, people as infrastructure. And so what worked and then what things really need to be there. What were places of failure or weakness? Often it's these unexpected outcomes or uh, happenings, as Theresa told us, things that you wouldn't anticipate, like the failure of the pollution controls that help alert you to what you really need to do next. And then finally, I'll just say again, Kara couldn't be here today because she's at a training, but I know she would welcome your interests, questions. They will be looking for another cohort of community-based organizations in the next round. So right now they have their first group and they're just starting. And again, some of my students were fortunate to work with some of these organizations in helping sort of get them going. But I think one nice thing is that this will form really a group of sort of kindred spirits around a topic, and therefore you can there'll be a lot of peer-to-peer learning, I think, that will happen. So if you are not involved in Wayne, if you are in Wayne County and interested in this program, please follow up with Kara. And I have the task of saying thank you and opening this up for questions and answers, or even people on the call who want to share other resources. I think we're all eager and interested in expanding what we know about these emerging resilience centers. So thanks very much.
Thank you all. I do see some questions coming in, so we can start to field those. We also have about 10 people in the room with us that if you all have questions, we can feed them in, so let us know. Theresa, I don't know if you want to start. There was a question in our chat that speaks to university community partnerships. So what can the university researchers do to be most impactful for the community?
In my opinion, have to be my opinion, and I speak for a lot of the community members. Researchers can be very helpful in helping us to define the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of our community, do the SWOT analysis. And when they do that, make sure that the experts are in the room, and the experts are the people that are actually experiencing on a daily basis. Oftentimes, we see academia come into our community, gain our knowledge and intellectual property, and go off and leave us. We need people to stay here for the long term. We need research to help us find funding to be able to design, create, and establish a resiliency hub that will fit the needs of our community. And so those are some of the ways that the researchers can help. Also, to the students, you can also come in and be interns, walk with us, talk with us, learn what our needs are, and then help us devise ways that will be impactful to help us. You know what I mean? It's always good to have young minds and researchers come help a community, because it's, 2 heads are better than 1.
Thank you, Theresa. And there was a mention of funding. There's also a question about funding, which is a little precarious right now. I don't know if anyone can speak to, I know no one has a crystal ball, but in terms of where funding has come or where they think funding could come for these resiliency hubs, they're not cheap endeavors. So I don't know, Kathy, Larissa, if you have thoughts.
I'll just talk a little bit about the Wayne County money. So they were fortunate to receive approximately $2 million for this, again, planning process. Some of it was from the Inflation Reduction Act, and some was from another source. And I know everyone is really uncertain right now about the future of that, but I believe that money is secure for the funding. But I think philanthropy is going to have to become a big part of this, who. I know the Kellogg Foundation has been involved and funded some things, but I think, again, it's all of us collectively thinking about almost any option and then seeing what's possible. I'm sure it's going to have to be a complex kind of layering of funding to create something that starts. And then, as everyone always stresses, operation and maintenance take dedicated funding as well, which sometimes aren't as easy to get.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's we're going to have to see it coming from from either state or philanthropy, community development organizations, kind of coalitions. There might have to be some creative ways to find ways to fund resiliency hubs, especially in the near term. Until recently, through the Inflation Reduction Act, the EPA had substantial funding, and this was one of the things that they were funding. But I think that we can't really depend on that anymore. So, yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. There's another question that gets into sort of the accessibility issues and planning and designing of getting close enough that folks can walk. Theresa's talked a lot about sort of when folks cannot get into or get out of a certain area because of different barriers going on, whether that be from the emergency, whether that be just from the design of the city. But what are some of the ways that we can make these spaces accessible for someone who maybe can't walk there during a flooded event? Or what are your thoughts on that, all of you?
So really important, and I think a question that doesn't have a single answer. I think this is something that would probably be on the list of discussion items to work through with the community, and I think might require different kinds of creative solutions and strategies. And it really depends on the different community assets, the geography, the needs, and so I don't think I can, and I don't think I even have like great case studies for that right now. But I would put that high on my list of things to look into of what other communities have done to address this.
I think I think flooding is probably one of the toughest ones to get people through flooding. I mean, we see, dinghies and other things being used in places, but I think as far as heat, and again, some of my friends on the call know this well, is that you can use buses almost as mobile sources, not only to move people, but to be kind of mobile cooling areas sometimes. And the bus can also be connected to, if it's an electric bus, to power the generator at the resilience hub. But I think, Kathy is right. Each impact will have different impacts on what accessibility means. And I think, maybe the first is just figuring out what are the impacts of priority in your community. And then, I think flooding could be one of the toughest if it is, if people can't make it through the water. But I think, I agree that we have lots to learn, but topography probably is one of the things to examine there.
I would like to join into this solution solving challenge. We have unused buildings in our community that are easily accessible. And when I talk about Jefferson, Schaefer, Outer Drive, and parts of 4th Street being flooded, what we can also use the researchers to do is help us do mapping. Help us map our residential streets, the ones that lead to a building without being impeded by water. And we do have such buildings that are centrally located that our residents can, walk to and drive to within the 2-block radius. So we need to define those thoroughfares that are open, and the residents know which ones are open. We know the back roads to be able to get out during an emergency. So we need to sit down, create a evacuation plan, and then present it to the state, present it to the county, present it to the city, because they're not coming to us asking us what we need. They're just designing it, putting it on the web. And who's going to go to a computer, try to get to a website during an emergency? Not me. I'm going to think, I can go up Liddesdale. I can go up Liddesdale to Schaefer, where there's a thoroughfare, get to Pleasant Street. Pleasant Street is not usually blocked, but just, during that certain situation, when the train derailed, we couldn't get out Pleasant Street. But we know the back roads. So the best thing to do is for the people to get together, show and map what areas the exits and entrances to the community for emergency services to get to us, or for us to get out to get to emergency services. And we know that we're the experts. We know how to get in and out. We know the alleyways and the byways to cut through. And we have a lot of open space that we feel that if we had the funding, we could rehab. We could provide a water purification system, because during some of these outages, the water, we could not use the water because it was flooded. And then with the basement backups, we could come up with a pilot programs that we've been writing grants for, to provide solar powered generators with backup batteries. And the people that have flooding in their basement, give them a sump pump. And then if the power goes out, they're covered to a certain degree. And we can also work with the county and with the places like the Salvation Army to have food stations. And then with the hub, once it's established, we could have all of that, as Kathy mentioned. We could have CERT training on one-on-one instead of a general. You know what I mean? How do you get a patient out of a bed that's bedridden when you only have one person in? Do we have a Hoyer lift? Or do we teach the people how to lift and put someone in a wheelchair to be able to get? We need that kind of knowledge to be able to help ourselves. We need the resources to survive and thrive, as that's the catchphrase now. But if you talk to the people, they can give you the things that they need, and they can point to buildings that can be rehabbed. We just need the funding, we need the plan, and allow the people to sit down and design what their needs are. We need air purification system, because we couldn't open our windows when all the poison was going up in the air. We didn't know. And this is not funny, but I laugh because it caught me off guard. One lady said we need gas masks because the air was so poisoned. So you listen to the people. They come up with unique solutions that could be viable solutions.
Thank you, Theresa. Larissa, I'm wondering if you want to take the slides down so we can just chat. Thank you.
No problem. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. You're good. Lots more questions coming in and examples of how to do this work. Folks it's certainly looking at what you mentioned, Larissa, this idea that there's co-learning in this moment to happen and in sharing resources. We have one person who's a student. They're a grad student at Master's in Public Health and a nurse, and they're looking for ways that healthcare fits into this, but also sort of how do we connect across different communities doing this work. It sounds like Wayne County's hub is one aspect of that. Clearly, this is like a cross-sector, cross-community initiative, but then local issues and local needs. So are there any other networks or spaces where people are having these conversations that folks should know about?
Well, I know locally, the city of Ann Arbor is trying to establish some of these. In the Bryant community, the community center is one of the first, and I believe its main strength is the power backup. So I think even if you're in Washtenaw County and you're at the U of M, I think even close to home, we can find examples to visit and learn from.
You have anything to add to that, Theresa?
No, that was a great answer. And then one thing that we know, I see a question in the chat about community science. The data that's been collected in our community, it has come from community. So we already are practicing community science because we are the ones who have been able to provide the data to academia, to researchers, to the state, to the city, and to the county about what our needs are. And then I'm sure that when we talked to Homeland Security, they were shocked at the knowledge that the residents had about situations. You know what I mean? One resident, she said, you know what I did? I went and got trained in CPR. I also got trained to use a defibrillator. So we need that kind of training and to be brought to the community and work with the people one-on-one. People have different ways of learning. People orally, visually. We need that hands-on training, and we need those resources brought into the community. Also, we can work with our city if they're willing to make the community center a backup. You know what I mean? As you know, we know that when the power go out here, Kimony is only on partial power to keep the essentials going. But if we could utilize the resources in the city, we could have backup generators. This could be a continuous warming center or cooling center if we have the funds to bring everything we need here. In case like we can't get out, people don't have power, we could have cots and those aluminum blankets to keep people warm. We can work with DTE to bring in their mobile generating station, which I just learned about last year, right? And then we could talk to the people. The people, I'm telling you, the people have the knowledge. We just don't have the access and the ability to get to the people, the right people, to bring resources to our community.
Well, friends, we are past time, and I think that's the perfect note to end on. And I'm scrolling. There's so many more questions, and people are talking about how to connect this to food access, mutual aid networks, to examples that we will share with everybody. There's so much there. So obviously, this is the start of a conversation, and it continues on from work that people have been doing for decades, like Theresa and others. So thank you, Larissa. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Theresa. Thanks for everyone joining. We'll share out the links in the recording, and hope you all have a good rest of your day. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.